4 of the defendant's motion in limine, which involved the issue of whether witnesses can testify that the wounds on the victim, Mr. Bagley, were consistent with knives found in the defendant's possession or belongings. To the extent the medical examiner, who is an expert witness, would render such opinions, the court finds that those opinions are admissible. The court would find that in order to give that opinion, it would require expert qualifications, and no other witnesses will be allowed to testify to such opinions. And I'm presuming that the medical examiner will be qualified as a pathologist or medical examiner. If she isn't, then I would revisit this rule. Any further record we need to make on those issues from the state's perspective, Ms. Slaughter?
No, Your Honor.
From the defendants, Mr. Speeds? Thank you. Are we ready to proceed, Ms. Slaughter?
Your Honor, I believe that we are, and I'll be handling the questioning of our next witness, who is Drew Wagner.
And do we have him waiting to come in at this point?
Yes, Your Honor, I could signal to the transport deputies to bring him in. If you would like to have him brought in before the jury, well then.
We'll have him just come in like everyone else.
Okay.
Mr. Spees, are you ready to proceed?
We are.
Let's take a short recess. I have to tell the court attendant to bring the jury.
This Iowa District Court is in session. The Honorable Christopher Bruns presiding.
Please be seated. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Vanderstand, the state may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. State calls Drew Wagner to the stand.
Mr. Wagner, please raise your right hand for me. You solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Put your hand down. Please take your seat. Please state your full name for the record and spell your last name.
Drew Michael Wagner, W-A-G-N-E-R.
And Mr. Wagner, can I have you pull, there's a mic with a red light there, pull that a little closer to you. Thank you. You're with me, Mr. Vanderstand.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Wagner. For our benefit, could you state your full name for the record?
Drew Michael Wagner,
And your age, sir?
35 years old.
And where do you currently live?
The Lynn
Where you
County
live?
Correctional Center.
And that's the Lynn County Jail?
That's correct.
How long have you lived in the jail?
I got here at the end of October in 2019, so I've been here about 21 months, I believe.
And what you're wearing to court today, is that standard issue in the jail?
That is correct.
Where did you live, sir, before you became an inmate at the Lynn County Jail?
4069 Cedar Avenue, Southeast in Cedar Rapids.
And is that an apartment or a residence?
It's a residence.
And did you live with anybody else on Cedar Avenue?
My daughter stayed with me on the weekends.
How long had you lived there at the Cedar Avenue residence?
I moved in to the Cedar Avenue residence at around Thanksgiving of that year, so yeah, not long.
How long had you lived in the Cedar Rapids area?
I moved back to the Cedar Rapids area in 2008, and then I moved back to Cedar Rapids from Des Moines in 2014.
Where'd you grow up?
Cedar Rapids.
Did you go to the Cedar Rapids schools?
Yes, I went to Monroe and Johnson, and then I also went to a small school district outside of Cedar Rapids called Midland Community. I went there a little bit in elementary and then again in high school.
How far did you go in school?
I'm a couple credits short of my AA.
And what school would that be?
DMAC is the last school that I went to in Ankeny, outside of Des Moines.
And what was the name of that school again?
Des Moines Area Community College.
Do you have family in the area?
Yes, I do.
And what family do you have in the area?
My father recently moved back here. My sister lives here as well, and I have a couple brothers that live in Cedar Rapids as well.
Mr. Wagner, were you employed before you became incarcerated?
Yes, I was. My business partner and I owned DD Crete LLC, otherwise known as D&D Concrete.
Okay. So was concrete work your line of work?
For a short period of time. Before that, I was an independent contractor installing fences and decks. And then before that, for 3 or 4 years, I ran a bunch of restaurants around the Cedar Rapids and inside Iowa.
So initially, you're in kind of the restaurant work, and then you shifted gears and you got into concrete, is that right?
That is correct.
And who were you working with back in 2018?
Dan Castle.
And what was the name of the company?
It was DD Crete LLC, but we advertise ourselves as D&D Concrete.
So D&D Concrete stand for Drew and Dan then?
He liked to call it Dan and Drew. I
Okay.
called it Drew and Dan, but that's correct.
Tell us a little bit about your relationship with your business partner back then, Dan Castle.
We knew each other in high school. We hadn't seen each other for a really long time. We reconnected in late spring of 2018 and kind of became friends all over again and kind of, he had a lot of experience with concrete. I had business management experience, and something we kind of fell into, and it took off.
Tell us a little bit about the concrete work that you were involved in with Dan Castle.
Cedar Rapids is undergoing a lot of sidewalk repairs, so we did a lot of sidewalk projects. That's how it started. Then we went into driveways and patios and custom work, and we were just getting into like businesses, and we were about to start doing some parking lots and foundations as well.
Mr. Wagner, I'd like to shift gears now and ask that you talk to us a little bit about the reasons why you are in jail right now. Originally, the grand jury indicted you for the very same charges that Drew Blahnik was charged with. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is, you were charged with 3 crimes as co-defendants to begin with. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Since you were indicted by the grand jury, have you since then pled guilty to some criminal charges in connection with the death of Chris Bagley?
Yes, I did.
And I want to go through those charges to make sure that we're on the same page. Did you plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter using a deadly weapon?
Yes, I did.
And is it your understanding that for voluntary manslaughter using a deadly weapon, you will receive a 10-year sentence with a minimum 5 to serve?
That is correct.
And did you also plead guilty to assault while participating in a felony?
That is correct as well.
And that case also carried a 5-year minimum, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And just to back up, the crime itself carries a 10-year sentence, but there's a 5-year minimum because of the use of a deadly weapon, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you also plead to a 3rd charge of conspiracy to commit a forcible felony?
That is correct as well.
And your understanding that that charge also brings a 10-year sentence?
Yes, sir.
And did you also plead guilty to abuse of a corpse?
Yes.
And is it your understanding that you'll receive 5 years in prison for that crime?
Yes.
And you also pled guilty to a 5th charge of obstruction of prosecution, is that correct?
That is correct as well.
And is it your understanding that you'll receive a 2-year sentence for that crime?
Yes.
And just so that it's clear, As far as the charges go that deal with the death of Chris Bagley, you pled guilty to a total of 5 charges, is that correct?
That is correct.
And is it your understanding that when you are sentenced, all those sentences will run consecutive? That is, one after the other, is that correct?
That is correct as well, for a total of 37 years, I believe.
37 years with a minimum 10 to serve, is that your understanding?
Yes,
And the judge has no discretion on that, that's an agreed upon sentence, 37 years, 10-year minimum, is that your understanding?
yes, sir.
Now, I also understand that you pled guilty to some other charges based upon some marijuana that was found in your residence during the course of this investigation. Is that true as well?
Yes,
And did you also plead guilty to possession with intent to deliver marijuana?
yes,
And did you also plead guilty to a crime called a drug tax stamp violation relating to marijuana?
yes, I did.
And is it your understanding that that could add another 5 years to your 37-year sentence?
Yes,
So we're looking at a possibility of 42 years.
correct.
And if I understand correctly also, since you have been in jail, you incurred a new charge having to do with bringing controlled substances into the jail. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you plead guilty to that charge?
Yes, I did.
And does that also carry a 5-year sentence?
Yes, it does.
And do you understand that on that charge, the state is free to ask for another 5-year consecutive term to be added to your 42 years?
Yes,
Do you understand that you're going to be sentenced for these crimes on August 6th?
yes,
And is it your understanding that at that time, you may be sentenced to a total of 47 years in prison with a minimum 10 years to serve?
yes, that is correct.
I also want to talk about a couple other terms of the plea agreement that your lawyer had with us on the charges that you pled guilty to, the charges connected to the death of Chris Bagley and the drugs found in your residence. Do you understand also that after you were sentenced, part of the agreement was that you forfeit or give up any right to appeal anything about your case?
That's correct.
So once you're sentenced on August 6th, that's it for you. You go serve your time, no appeals.
Correct.
And was it also a condition of your plea agreement to provide truthful testimony with regard to the charges against your co-defendant, Drew Blahnik?
Yes,
And is it your further understanding that if you do not give truthful testimony with regard to the case involving Drew Blahnik, that your plea agreement could be revoked and
yes,
the original charges reinstated? Is that your understanding?
yes,
And did you also agree, sir, as part of your plea agreement, to give truthful testimony in any case that is brought against any person in connection with the death of Christopher Bagley?
that is correct.
Now, I believe you understand that you could have faced worse if you hadn't pled guilty. Is that your understanding?
Yes,
So in your own mind, this decision to plead guilty to the crimes we've talked about, was that your decision?
yes,
And why did you enter into the agreement that we've just talked about?
because I'm guilty.
Also, I want to shift gears again and ask you some questions about some of the other people involved in this case. Are you acquainted with the defendant in this case, Drew Blahnik?
Yes, I am.
And how did you come to know Drew Blahnik?
He was friends with my cousin, who is now deceased. I've known Drew Blahnik on and off since I was about 19 years old.
Was he somebody that you met in school, or was this all after high school?
We met each other a little bit in high school, but mostly after.
And tell us about your connection with Drew Blahnik. I mean, you told us about how long you've known him. Tell us a little bit more about your relationship with him back in 2018.
We had just started kind of becoming friends again. Our friendship was on and off, sporadic. We really hadn't been good friends or close friends since about 2014. I believe around 2018 he was going through a breakup and kind of reconnecting maybe with some of his older friends, or yeah, and that's kind of how we became friendly again.
Did you also know him through the work that you did with D&D Concrete?
Yes, he helped us on a couple of jobs because he is a framer, framing up some steps on a couple of jobs. Yeah.
So you knew him through work, too, that you did with Dan Castle?
Correct. The work came out of our friendship. He was friends with Dan Castle as well. I would say that he was pretty close with Dan Castle for quite a few years.
And back in 2018, did you also know Andy Shaw?
Yes.
Tell us about your connection with Andy Shaw.
I knew Andy Shaw probably 2010, 2011, a little bit, through marijuana. And then I became friends again with Andy Shaw in 2017, at the end of 2017.
Was there some drug activity that you were involved in concerning Andy Shaw?
Yes, marijuana.
Okay. And tell us a little bit more about that.
Andy was a large-scale marijuana trafficker. He's somebody that I procured my marijuana through and sold it throughout Cedar Rapids.
Okay. And when we talk about marijuana, what form of marijuana are we talking about? Are we talking about baggies?
Mostly cartridges, pounds of, I guess you'd say, leaf marijuana, marijuana extract, and marijuana edibles as well.
Okay. And did your involvement with Andy Shaw concerning the marijuana start in 2017?
A little bit in 2010 and 11, and then I got out of the marijuana trade for a while. I had my daughter, and then again in 2017, our relationship was purely based at the beginning off of selling marijuana.
Were you aware of where Andy Shaw would operate his marijuana activity from? Was there a place he did that?
Multiple places. He had a shop out by the airport on, I believe it's Capitol Drive. He had another shop on First Avenue. And I believe a little bit out of his home as well.
This marijuana activity that you were involved in, that you've described with Andy Shaw, I understand you were also close with Drew Blahnik during the same time. To your knowledge, did you have direct personal knowledge of Drew Blahnik being involved in the same with Andy Shaw?
Objection, irrelevant, in Rule 5.103 and 5.403.
Overruled.
May answer.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Well, we're reading that.
This marijuana activity activity that you were involved in, you described with August 6th. I understand you were also close with Drew Blahnik during the same time. To your knowledge, did you have direct personal knowledge of Drew Blahnik being involved in this time on August 6th?
If I had the question correctly, it'd be, was Drew Blahnik involved with Andy Shaw with marijuana activity? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Somewhat, a little bit, towards the end of their friendship. I think he was more of like a middleman, kind of relationship. I didn't really know, the defendant to sell a lot of marijuana based on his own, but a little bit, I believe.
Okay. So you told us about your connection with Andy Shaw back in 2018. Andy Shaw was also someone who had involvement or that was acquainted with the defendant in this case, Mr. Blonic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You told us a little bit about your drug activities, the marijuana, and dealings with Andy Shaw. In that line of work, are you aware of any kind of drug rip-offs or drug robberies that occurred with regard to Andy Shaw?
Yes.
Can you tell us about those, please?
The first one that I'm aware of happened on around Halloween, October of 2018, I believe, and it involved Paul Hoff and Chris Bagley at Andy's shop on Capitol Drive.
Was there more than one?
Yes, I know personally of 2 other large-scale thefts as well.
2 other large-scale rip-offs?
Yes, sir.
Did the rip-offs all involve just drugs, or was there other property involved?
There was one in November at his shop as well. He had 2 shops on Capitol Drive, and that one involved a lot of property, I believe, excuse me, as well. Money, marijuana, but a lot of property, a lot of tools, a lot of appliances, I think, to put into some of his flip houses. A lot of expensive stuff that he kept in the shop.
You mentioned Chris Bagley's name. Were you acquainted with Chris Bagley back in December of 2018?
Yes, I met Chris Bagley, I believe in May or June of 2018 through Dan Castle.
And could you tell us a little bit more about the nature of your acquaintance to Christopher Bagley?
At first it was through concrete. Chris was an experienced concrete worker, really smart. Him and Dan worked side by side a lot together. I think he was kind of like Dan's big brother. Provided us a lot of information and knowledge. As I was just starting to kind of get into the business, he was, helping me out with a lot of questions I had as well. And then I started seeing Chris at Andy's shop a little bit after I met him through Dan.
Did Christopher Bagley have a working space or a shop out at the business that Andy Shaw ran out of?
Yes, I've been there once, I believe, when it was Chris's shop. I think Andy ended up taking it over at some point. I don't know if he bought it or was renting it out to Chris, but yeah, Chris did have a shop, I believe, out at Capitol Drive.
So there was a time when Chris Bagley actually was working in the same shop that was owned by Andy Shaw, is that right?
Yeah, I didn't know if it was owned by Andy, but yes, I think they were side by side.
Okay.
Yeah.
You told us earlier about these robberies, these rip-offs that Chris Bagley did with regard to Andy Shaw's property. How did you become aware of them?
The one that happened on Halloween, I actually became aware of it through my girlfriend at the time. She was friends with Andy's wife and showed me a picture of Andy pretty beaten up. And then Andy told me about it himself a couple days later. The one that happened out at his shop in November with the property, I was aware that, I believe the day or two after, he showed the defendant and I a video of a truck driving through the shop. And then there was one more. I didn't know if you want to know about that as well.
Well, so these rip-offs that you became aware of, rip-offs that Chris Bagley did of Andy Shaw's property, these came to your attention from Andy Shaw himself, it sounds like, at some point.
That is correct.
And if you add up the sum total of the value of everything that was taken in these rip-offs, you have any idea about what the sum total might be?
The second one would be hard to judge because it was a lot of tools and property, but I think Andy quoted the second one at probably $75,000 to $100,000. The first one was, I believe, $23,000 in cash and maybe another $30,000 in marijuana. And then the last one, the big one, at Red Fox, I think it was probably around $150,000 up to $200,000.
This one on Red Fox, tell us a little bit about that. I'm not sure if I asked you about that yet.
That is the last one that happened early December, I believe, at one of Andy's rental houses, or houses that he was flipping.
So Andy Shaw had a rental property on Red Fox Road Southeast?
That is correct.
Okay. So there are 3 robberies altogether that you were aware of that Chris Bagley committed on the property of, regarding property involving Andy Shaw, is that right?
That is correct. The third one, however, I'm not 1,000% sure. You know, I'm not if that was Chris. It was alleged, and I believe he may have taken responsibility for it through Andy, but I don't know if that was true or not. Okay. So I don't want to say that he for sure did that one, but I think the first 2 were for sure Chris.
In early December of 2018, did there come a time when Andy Shaw approached you and Drew Blahnik asked you to do something to Christopher Bagley because of these rip-offs?
It was in November, after the theft of a lot of the property. Once he showed us the video of a truck getting drove through the garage. I was at my house, and he asked me what I was doing, if I wanted to stop by, because I was looking to buy some marijuana, and he just had a new shipment of marijuana and cartridges in. I told him that I was with the defendant at my house, and his words were perfect. Bring him with you. I'd like to talk to you guys.
Okay. And maybe if you could just a little bit further from the mic, it might not give us
Oh,
the
sorry.
feedback.
I didn't know if you aren't hearing the static, then maybe you're not
Okay.
hearing me.
So tell us a little more about this first occasion when you had contact with Andy Shaw about Chris Bagley, and you informed him that Drew Blahnik was with you. I think you were telling us he asked you to come over.
Your Honor, this calls for hearsay, and I object.
objection to the question as phrased because the question will encompass hearsay. Could you rephrase it to be more specific so we can tell what answer you may be going to elicit?
Okay. Well, I think you told us Andy Shaw asked you to come meet with him, is that right?
That is correct.
And did you do that?
Yes, we did.
And where did you meet Andy Shaw at?
At his shop on Capitol Drive,
And who was with you?
the defendant.
And we've been referring to him as the defendant, Drew Blahnik. Do you see Drew Blahnik in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Could you point him out for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please? The man here in the very end of the table with the dark suit and the blue tie.
That is correct.
May the record reflect, Your Honor, that the witness has identified the defendant.
It may so reflect.
Tell us what happened then when you met with Andy Shaw out at his shop on this occasion.
He showed us a video of I believe, a white Dodge Dakota, an older truck, driving through one of his shop doors. And then basically a video of people getting out of the truck and committing committing a crime or stealing from his shop. And as he was doing that, we both looked at the video. He asked us if we knew anybody that drove that kind of truck or we heard anything about this. Neither of us had. He kind of told us some of the stuff that was stolen.
I'm going to ask that counsel proceed by question and answer so I can lodge an appropriate objection.
I'll allow the answer to this point, Mr. Anderson, and ask another question, please.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, Andy Shaw is showing you a video, a security video of another one of these burglaries to his business, is that right?
That is correct.
And was this one of those that you described as being committed by Chris Bagley?
Correct.
Okay. And at some point after the discussion about this burglary, there come a time when Andy Shaw asked you and Drew Blahnik to do something about that.
Objection, hearsay.
Yes. It was more of a conversation with the defendant. I was standing there, but it was a conversation with both of us at first.
Okay, hold on, sir. Wait for another question. Mr. Anderson.
Okay. And so tell us about that conversation that you were a party to.
Objection, hearsay.
If I could respond, Your Honor.
Yes.
I believe this testimony is admissible under Iowa Rule of Evidence 5.801 D2E, the conspiracy exception to the hearsay rule, as a conversation that is done in the course and the furtherance of a conspiracy to commit a crime.
Okay, I'll have counsel approach, please. with the attorneys at this point in time. We're going to recess for about 15 minutes till about 10:15. That's just my guess on how long this will take. Hopefully I'm accurate, I may not be. As I told you before, it's longer, you should blame me because no one else has had input on this guess. Please remember your admonition during the recess.
All rise. This Iowa District Court is in recess.
And what did Andy Shaw ask you to do?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled. The conversation was more with the defendant than myself, but I was standing right there. And he said somewhere along the lines, he wants you to kill him for something grand. I didn't hear the exact amount that he said, but the defendant.
Hold on just a second, Mr. Wagner.
I believe the witness's mic is muted, Your Honor. Go ahead, Mr. Wagner.
I was standing there, and he was talking to the defendant, and Andy said something about killing Chris for something grand.
Grand?
Grand.
Okay.
Grand. I didn't hear the exact dollar amount, but then I saw the defendant laugh and said, "Oh no, it would cost you way more than that."
During this same meeting that you were a party to that occurred at Andy Shaw's shop, and if I understand, we're talking about late November 2018,
Middle to late November of 2018.
were there further discussions between Andy Shaw and Drew Blahnik concerning Chris Bagley that you yourself heard at that time?
They were discussing about procuring a ghost gun with a silencer, and they both started laughing because I believe they both knew the same person or same persons where they could both buy said gun.
A ghost gun to be used in connection with killing Chris Bagley.
Correct.
So there was actually discussions about possible ways in which to carry out a plan to kill Chris Bagley.
Yes.
Any other ways or methods they talked about at that time?
Objection, hearsay.
There was talk about doing a robbery together or something like that, but I didn't really hear much of the back end of that. I walked away when they started talking about the ghost guns, and I kind of realized this is pretty serious. And so I kind of walked away and started looking at the cartridges and putting them all in a bag and showing them what I wanted to buy.
So during this meeting at Shaw's business property that you've been telling us about, he actually would keep product there on the premises, is that right?
A lot, yes.
And when you say you were looking at some of it, what exactly are you talking about?
I was looking at all the different flavors of cartridges, THC cartridges, because there was thousands of them, sometimes up to 100 different flavors. Certain customers liked certain different flavors or potency. So I was looking through all the drawers. He used to keep them in toolboxes. And so I was looking through all the drawers and looking for things that I know certain people liked.
Several times you've made reference to this term THC cartridge. Could you tell us what exactly is a THC cartridge?
It's a cartridge of marijuana oil. You can put it on a battery for like an e-cigarette as well. And you can smoke marijuana pretty anonymously. People think it's a e-cigarette. So that would be the actual THC cartridge, would actually be the thing that goes on top that you screw into the battery to smoke.
And they come in different flavors?
Hundreds, thousands of different flavors.
And as far as what you saw on Shaw's property, what kind of quantity are we talking about? What kinds, how are they packaged?
Some of them were in boxes. Every brand has a different box or packaging. Some of them came in like a plastic packaging with a seal. You have to rip it open, kind of like a Ziploc bag, but a lot of them came in boxes with different characters or flavors, and they also had the brand on them as well.
And when we talk about boxes of THC cartridges, how many cartridges would fit in a box?
One. They were individual.
Okay. How many individual ones to a box, roughly?
There would be one individual cartridge in each individual box. And sometimes, I'd see up to 5,000, 10,000 different cartridges. Sometimes more.
Were there any other discussions that you had with Drew Blahnik himself concerning killing Chris Bagley?
The night Chris died, when he came over to my residence.
Okay, let's talk about that day. I want to take you back to December 13th, 2018. And can you tell us about what happened that day and your contact with Drew Blahnik on that day?
I was at home. We had worked at a job off of Beaver Avenue that day. I'd spoken to my business partner after work, and he said that the defendant was probably going to be working with us the next day on doing some steps, because he's a framer, and he does some of the steps whenever we're doing a job. I called the defendant to ask him if he was working. He was a little bit inconsistent, and we really needed him that next day. So I asked him if he wanted, I was going to ask him if he wanted to stay at my house that day. I believe he was out at the bar drinking, but when I called him, he said that he really needed to talk to me anyways, and said he was going to stop by.
Did he stop by?
A couple hours later, he did stop by. It was a good amount of time later where I kind of forgot that he was even coming over. It was pretty late in the evening.
Do you know how he got to your residence?
Drove.
He drove?
Yes.
Did he have his own vehicle?
Yes.
What kind of a vehicle was that?
An older gray F-150.
And I think you said that it was pretty late. Any idea about what time Drew Blahnik got to your residence the evening of December 13th?
It was pretty late. I was laying in bed scrolling on my phone. It had been, it would have to be after 11, maybe even around midnight. I quite honestly forgot that he was even coming over, and it scared the hell out of me when I heard the door open.
So tell us what happened after Drew Blahnik got to your residence the evening of December 13th.
He came over. I walked out of my bedroom, saw it was him. I believe he took a beer out of the fridge. We started kind of hanging out a little bit. And right then he asked me if I had talked to Paul or Chris that night. I told him I hadn't. I hadn't seen Chris for quite a while. I told him I didn't really know Paul why, and that he said he really needed to find Chris ASAP. And he said he needed to handle something for Andy.
Did he elaborate on that?
I said, my exact words are like, "Oh, so y'all are serious about that?" And yeah, and he said, "You know, he wants me to kill him," and he put his hand on his hip to where his knife was, and he laughed about it.
Did you see the knife?
I saw the sheath. I didn't see the actual knife itself, but I saw the handle. I did not see the blade.
Can you describe what this knife and the sheath looked like?
It was a light military green. I guess you'd call it military green. Yeah.
And he was asking you if you knew where Chris Bagley was?
if I had heard anything or talked to him or Paul, because he was told apparently by some girl that they were together or going to be together.
This is something that Drew Blahnik told you.
Yes, that is correct.
What did he say in terms of how he found out where Chris Bagley was?
His exact words?
His exact words.
He said, some bitch.
Some bitch told him where Chris Bagley was?
Told him that Chris and Paul were going to be together, or were together.
And when you say Paul, we're talking about Paul Hoff?
That is correct.
Did you know Paul Hoff?
I'd met him 2 times, sparingly, maybe 3. I didn't know a whole lot about him. I had just met him a couple weeks before that through a mutual friend, and he was trying to buy marijuana off of me, in which I told Andy about. Andy told me that that might be a good person that he'd want to have on his side, and told me that I should think about selling marijuana to him.
So to your knowledge back then, Paul Hoff was involved in drug activity too, is that right?
Yes, not with me, but I believe with Chris. I believe he got his marijuana off of Chris.
Did you know where Paul Hoff lived back then?
I had heard that he had a residence on Johnson Avenue, and I knew that he had a trailer on Mount Vernon Road towards the Casey's. I wasn't quite sure which one, but I saw him one day outside of like the trailer park.
So tell us more about this discussion you had with Drew Blahnik about locating Chris Bagley and how he came to learn where Chris Bagley was.
He just said that he had heard from some bitch that they were together. He asked me if I'd talked to Chris or Paul, and I told him that I didn't really talk to Paul. Paul made me a little nervous, but I had his number. And as the night got later and later, we were drinking and, using some cocaine. He started getting a little bit more aggressive, I guess, and wanting to find out where they were at.
So what did you do then in an effort to find out where Chris Bagley was?
He asked me if I knew where Chris lived. I told him I knew of a place in Walker. I'd been there once with Chris to help him load some stuff up. He was insinuating wanting me to drive out to Walker, which I was not going to do. That was not going to happen. But then it got to the point where about Paul, if they were together, they'd probably be in Cedar Rapids. And I didn't really know the house on Johnson, but that's when I told him that I knew of the trailer park on Mount Vernon Road.
Did there come a time then when the two of you left together to actually look for Chris Bagley?
Yes. At first he asked to take my truck, and I told him that I would drive. And I kind of knew between 1 to 2 or 3 of the front trailers, I kind of knew that it was in that area. So I think I had more knowledge of the general area of Paul Hoff's trailer.
So if I understand what you're telling us is that initially Drew Blahnik wanted to borrow your truck to look for Chris Bagley, is that right?
Correct.
And do you know why he would ask for your truck if he had his own truck, his own means of transportation?
I know his truck had a broken tail light, or a headlight, I believe. I know that the license plates were different from the front to the back. I believe one belonged to the vehicle and one didn't. He also did not have a license, and it was pretty late, and there was damage to the vehicle. I know that.
So the two of you left in your truck.
That is correct.
And what kind of a truck did you have back then?
I had multiple trucks, but that truck was a 2002 or 2000 Chevy Silverado four-wheel drive.
And what color was it?
Like a gray with like red trim. I believe it had red trim.
And sir, there's a 3-ring binder in front of you. It's got a number of exhibits in there, and I'd like for you to flip through up to 72.
So what number?
72.
Okay.
And tell me when you got there.
That is a picture of my truck, the Chevy Silverado.
Okay, yeah. First of all, I want you to look at exhibits 72, 73, 74, and 75, if you will, and tell me when you've done that.
Okay.
And sir, do you recognize what's depicted in those 4 exhibits?
Those are pictures of my Chevy Silverado.
And do you believe those 4 exhibits, those 4 photographs, 72, 73, 74, and 75, are fair and accurate depictions of the way your Chevy pickup truck looked back on December 13th of 2018?
That is correct.
Okay. State would offer, Your Honor, exhibits 72, 73, 74, and 75.
Mr. Spees,
There's no objection.
exhibits 72, 73, 74, and 75 are admitted.
And at this time, Your Honor, I'd ask for the court's permission to publish these 4 exhibits in chronological order for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
You may do so.
We'll start with number 72. Here we're showing Mr. Wagner, exhibit number 72 that has been received in evidence now. Can you just tell us a little bit about this truck?
Is a truck that I bought recently. We were planning on using it for plowing in the winter.
Okay. So this is kind of a business truck you used.
Yes, it had business plates under the concrete company name.
Let's go briefly to 73. It's the same truck.
That is correct.
74
That is the same truck as well.
and 75.
That is the same truck.
And this is a truck that you were driving when you and Drew Blahnik went looking for Chris Bagley back on the evening of December 13th.
That is correct.
Okay. So tell us about the places that you went to. Where did you go to look for Chris Bagley that night?
We left my residence on Cedar, and we drove down Mount Vernon Road to the trailer park. And I slowed down as we got off of Mount Vernon Road to kind of look at the front. We were looking for Chris's truck,
Okay.
and we did not see it. We made a loop through the trailer park.
Now, when you left with Drew Blahnik to go looking for Chris Bagley, I mean, did you talk to Drew Blahnik about what you were going to do once you found him?
No, not at that point. We were just looking for him. We were kind of taking, I guess, a shot in the dark. You know, I wasn't really talking about it because I was hoping that we didn't find anything.
Okay. So I think you said you went to a trailer court on Mount Vernon Road near the Casey store, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And what did you do once you got to that trailer court?
I pulled in, slowed down a little bit, did not see Chris's truck, or I believed I saw Paul one time in a white Explorer, but I didn't see that either. I pulled through around the back. We didn't see anything. Chris is a pretty noticeable big truck, and I pulled back out and drove back to my house on Cedar.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're telling us is that this first time you went to the trailer court, you essentially just took a loop through the entire trailer court itself looking for the truck of Chris Bagley, is that right?
Basically a lap, you know, around the trailer park, because I guess it went around the back. I didn't really know where the road led, but it went around the whole trailer park and came out the other side.
And did you ever see Chris Bagley's truck?
No, we did not.
Okay. Since that time, have you come to learn that there was some security video on a trailer in that trailer court that captured the comings and goings of vehicles that went through the trailer court?
Yes, since that time, became aware of surveillance video.
And have you seen those videos?
Yes, I have.
And have you been able to observe your pickup truck that showed it going through the trailer court during the time you just described by your testimony?
Yes.
What I'd like for you to do is look on the screen at exhibit number 10, and we're going to show you several clips. And I want to ask you some questions about all these clips, starting with clip number 3 of exhibit number 10. And we're going to play it for you just here quickly. Did you see your pickup truck enter the trailer court in clip number 3?
Yes.
Now I want to show you clip number 4 and ask you the same question. And again, same question, Mr. Wagner. Did you just see your pickup truck enter the trailer court in exhibit number 4?
Yes.
Or I'm sorry, clip number 4 of exhibit 10.
Yes.
And now we're going to go to clip number 5 of exhibit number 10, and I'll ask you the same question. It just takes a minute to load it back up. And did you see your truck there again?
Yes.
And then we'll go on to clip number 6 of exhibit number 10. And did you see your pickup truck again in exhibit number 6?
Yes.
And then was that your truck?
Yes.
And finally, clip number 7 of exhibit number 10. I want you to take a look at this. And sir, was that your pickup truck in clip number 7 of exhibit number 10 we just saw, or you just saw?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would offer in evidence video clips number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of exhibit number 10.
Mr. Speaks,
Without objection.
Exhibit 10, clips 4, 5, 6, and 7 is admitted.
Let's go to clip number 3 of exhibit number 10, and I want you to tell us, Mr. Wagner, what we're seeing when we play this short video clip for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
You want me to publish that, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. What are we seeing here?
That is my truck pulling into the trailer park.
And Drew Blahnik is with you at that time?
Yes, he is in the passenger seat.
And did you just come off Mount Vernon Road?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And let's go to clip number 4 of exhibit number 10, and I'd ask for the court's permission to publish this or post this for the jury.
Permission is granted.
And if the timestamp says 4:32 a.m., does that comport with your recollection?
That is correct.
And again, was that your truck we just saw pull in?
Yes, it was.
Then we'll proceed to clip number 5 of exhibit number 10 and ask for the court's permission to post this for the jury.
Granted.
And again, sir, was that your pickup truck that we just saw drive around the side of the trailer court?
Yes, it was.
And then we'll proceed to clip number 6 of exhibit number 10 and ask for the court's permission to post this video for the jury.
Granted.
And again, sir, was that your pickup truck we just saw proceed back onto Mount Vernon Road?
Yes,
And if the timestamp says 4:33 a.m., does that comport with your memory?
that's correct.
So basically, you just took a swing through the trailer court,
Correct.
didn't stop?
No, we did not stop.
And finally, we'll go to clip number 7 of exhibit number 10 and ask for the court's permission to post video clip number 7 for the jury. And tell us what we see once this plays, sir. In clip number 7 of exhibit number 10, does that show you and Drew Blahnik leaving in your truck, having looped through the trailer court because you did not find Chris Bagley's truck?
That is correct.
So after you didn't find Chris Bagley's truck in that trailer court, what did you do next?
We went back to my residence.
And what did you do when you got back to your home on Cedar Avenue?
I started rolling a marijuana blunt or cigarette. And that is when the defendant asked me to call Paul Hoff.
And did you do that?
After some debate, yes, I did.
Okay. What was that debate about?
I didn't want to call him.
And why didn't you want to call him?
I was afraid that he would answer.
And why were you afraid that he might answer?
I was afraid he might answer because he wanted to buy marijuana off me. And I was afraid that he was with Chris. And I was afraid of what might happen.
What did you think was going to happen?
That the defendant was going to hurt Chris, and somehow I got myself involved in it.
Okay. So did you place that call to Paul Hoff?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you get a hold of him?
Yes.
Tell us about that conversation.
Well, before the conversation, before I made the phone call, I asked the defendant what I should say if he answered. He told me to tell him that, you know, we had to work early in the morning, we had a late night, see if he had any cocaine or Adderall, something to keep us awake. And then just steer the conversation and see who he was with. So then I called Paul. I was thinking about fake dialing it, but he told me to put it on speaker. So I put it on speaker. I called Paul. And the first or second thing out of his mouth when I asked him what he was doing was that he was hanging out with Chris. I didn't even have to ask if he had any cocaine, and I didn't even have to ask who he was with. And at that point, that's when I knew nothing good was going to happen. I knew it was going to be bad.
Did you tell Paul Hoff that you were there with Drew Blahnik?
I told him yes, that I was with Drew. And I told him that I'd be on my way.
What did you tell him in terms of why you wanted to go see him?
I just told him that I needed to speak to him about something, and I asked him if Chris was going to be over there. He said, yeah, we'll be here for a while. And I told him that I just needed to speak to him about something, and I hinted towards marijuana.
Okay. So you didn't advise Mr. Hoff at that time that the real reason why you wanted to go to his trailer was because you were looking for Chris Bagley?
That is correct. At that time, he did not know that.
Okay. So what did you do after your conversation with Paul Hoff?
I looked at the defendant and asked him what he wanted to do. And that's when he told me that we were going to go over there, hang out for a couple minutes. I was to try to talk to Paul in a separate room and leave Chris and him alone. Kind of let him know what's going on. Tell him that, I'm going to help him out with some weed. Kind of let him know that, we're over there because of the robberies for Andy, and see how he reacts to it and if he'd be cool with it.
And did Drew Blahnik explain any further about what was going to happen if Paul Hoff was cool with things?
He told me to have Paul in the back room. If everything was cool, to just stay in the back room. And he was going to handle it one-on-one. And then he said, if not, you'll hear me laughing, and you can come out, and we'll just, if something goes wrong, and we'll just jump him. That we just beat him up.
Okay. Any further discussion you had with Drew Blahnik at that point about what you were going to do once you got to the trailer?
No, that we were just going to hang out for a minute, and then I was going to try to pull and talk to Paul aside privately in the back.
Okay. So did you drive back then to Paul Hoff's trailer court?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And are you actually familiar with that area that is the trailer court that is close to Casey's and on Mount Vernon Road?
I know of it.
Okay.
I knew a kid like 10 years ago that lived in the back of it, or, I sold him a little marijuana one time. But other than that, I really wasn't very familiar with it. I'd never been to Paul Hoff's trailer before. I didn't really know exactly which one it was.
Okay. And even though you didn't know which one was Paul Hoff's trailer, did you know in general the trailer court itself that existed there on Mount Vernon Road?
Yes, and when I was on the phone with him, he told me that he lived in the brown one in the front.
Okay. If you would, sir, I'd like for you to look in the three-ring binder again at exhibit number 1 and exhibit number 2. Just look at those if you could. And do you recognize what's depicted in exhibit number 1?
Yes, that's an overview of the trailer park.
And do you recognize what's depicted in State's exhibit number 2?
Yes, that's a closer overview of the trailer park on Mount Vernon Road.
So exhibits 1 and 2 are both aerial shots of this trailer court where Paul Hoff was living back in December or what Paul Hoff's trailer was back in 2018.
That is correct.
And do you believe that these two exhibits, these two photographs are fair and accurate depictions of how the trailer court looked back on this occasion?
I believe so. It was dark out when I was there, but I believe.
State would offer exhibits 1 and 2 into evidence, Your Honor.
Mr. Speeds,
There's no objection.
exhibits 1 and 2 are admitted.
At this time, I ask for the court's permission to publish exhibit number 1 to the jury.
Permission granted.
Mr. Wagner, I want to draw your attention to the video screens here showing exhibit number 1. And in exhibit number 1, do you see this trailer court that we've been talking about?
Yes, I do.
And I think you were identifying some video clips for us earlier showing your truck enter the trailer court and then leaving. Can you tell us where you were coming from when you first entered the trailer court?
I was coming from my house on Cedar, and I took the first left. If you're coming from the left to the right of the screen, I took the first left and drove in a roundabout circle, like a half circle, to the exit on the Casey side, which I took a right, yes, that way, and I took a right, and I headed back towards my house on Cedar.
Okay. Where had you been before you actually entered this trailer court at 4:32 a.m.?
I'd been at my house on Cedar.
Okay. And now I ask for the court's permission to display or publish exhibit number 2.
Permission granted.
And I want to direct your attention now, Mr. Wagner, to exhibit number 2 and ask you if you can see Paul Hoff's trailer where it's located in this trailer court.
Yes,
Okay. And this is the one that's got the star on it?
yes it is.
And tell us where you parked when you and Drew Blahnik returned to the trailer court this second time.
Do you want me to use the red clicker?
Sure, if you
or-
could.
We parked right over here to the left of the trailer.
Okay. And now that you've got the pointer, can you show us how you looped through the trailer court that first time that we saw in the video clips?
Came in through here, looped this way, came out that way.
Okay. And your only reason for doing so at that time was because you were looking for Chris Bagley's truck?
For, yes, his F-350, I believe.
Okay. And you didn't see it, so you left?
No, we did not see it, so we left.
Did you see it when you returned the second time?
No, we did not.
Okay. But you still went to Paul Hoff's trailer, is that right?
Yes, because he said he was there.
And you parked in front.
That is correct.
Before you actually went into the trailer itself, did you have any further discussions with Drew Blahnik about what you were going to do once you got inside?
No.
Okay. Was Paul Hoff home?
Yes, he was.
He let you inside?
Yes, he did.
And from this vantage point on exhibit number 2, are you able to point out where the entryway was, the door that you used to go inside the trailer?
Right there.
Right to the left?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we can take that down now. On this occasion, sir, Mr. Wagner, do you recall what you were wearing that day?
I believe I had a blue Under Armour hoodie on
Okay.
and some jeans, some boots.
And can you recall how Drew Blahnik was dressed?
I believe he had a denim jacket that had a hood connected to it.
And you said that he had a knife that was in a sheath around his waist, is that right?
Yeah, on his right hip.
Was it unusual for you to see Mr. Blonic with a knife attached to him that way?
It would have been unusual if he didn't have it.
Okay. So tell us what happened when you got to Hoff's trailer then that morning.
We went into the trailer. As we walked in, Paul was behind a counter, like a L-shaped counter, rolling a marijuana blunt. And when I walked in, Paul was facing, as he opened the door, walked back around and was facing me, and Chris kind of had his back towards us.
So when you first got to the trailer, who actually was present?
Chris and Paul.
That was it?
That was it.
No women?
Never saw a woman there, no.
Okay. Now, sir, if I could, I'd like you to refer to that three-ring binder again and turn to exhibit number 8. And tell me when you found it.
I found it.
Okay. And do you recognize exhibit number 8?
Yes, I do. It's the inside of what I believe is the layout of Paul Hoff's trailer.
And this is just a schematic diagram, not drawn to scale of what it looks like inside?
I believe so.
And do you believe that this diagram, even though not drawn to scale, is a fair and accurate depiction of the way that Paul Hoff's trailer was laid out when you and Drew Blahnik arrived there on the morning of December 14th of 2018?
I believe so. I haven't been in all the rooms in that trailer, but I believe that to be correct.
Would this diagram be of assistance to you in describing the movements of the people that morning for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Yes.
Okay. State would offer an evidence, Your Honor, exhibit number 8.
Your Honor, I understand from Mr. Van der Sanden's description and the witness's response that this is for demonstrative purposes only and it's not to scale. And so given those limitations, we have no objection.
Exhibit 8 is admitted.
And at this time, Your Honor, I'd ask for the court's permission to publish this exhibit for the jury.
Permission granted.
And at this time, Mr. Wagner, if it would help for you to describe where you went and where people were, I'd like for you to use the pointer again. Tell us what you did when you got inside the trailer.
Okay. We walked in through that door. Paul walked right around to the back of this bar. That's where he was rolling the marijuana blunt. Chris kind of had his back turned. I believe there was a stool here. And Chris was right here
In front of the bar?
in front of the bar.
And describe, what does that bar actually look like?
It's like a glass countertop and made of wood. I believe he said he got it from like the Fox's Den, I believe an old strip club in Marion. I'm not sure of that though.
You told us where Chris was, and I think you're about to describe where you went.
I was just standing right here, talking to Paul. I kind of had my, Chris still had his back towards me. He was over here, but then he was kind of talking to the defendant right here. So they were right here, I was here, Paul was here.
How did Chris react when you and Drew Blahnik first showed up?
When I walked in, he had a shocked or surprised look on his face. As I walked in, I saw that he had a black knapsack, like a gym knapsack it looked like, that was on a stool. And he had what it looked like to be a rag or a towel or something in his hand. And then there was a gun that was in his hand at one point, but also on the stool, like he set it down. Him and I didn't talk very much, but he was being very friendly with the co-defendant because they've been hanging out a lot lately. So he talked to him, and I just said hi, and I started talking to Paul.
So when you first got there, you got the impression that Chris Bagley was surprised, but at first everything was cordial.
Surprised and cordial, but there was just a weird feeling. I don't know if it was a weird feeling because I knew something bad might be happening, or just, I don't know, but it just a weird feeling in the air.
I'm sorry, who had the weird feeling?
I just felt it personally. I just felt it off of Chris's vibe, not Paul's, but Chris's vibe, and I guess my own feeling.
You said that Chris had this gun out on the stool by the bar, is that right?
That is correct. It was a handgun, but I could see that it wasn't loaded. I could see that there was no clip on the bottom of it. And it looked like he was like cleaning it or wiping it down.
Okay. So what did you do next?
I spoke to Paul right here, and I told him, I kind of whispered to him like, hey, I kind of need to talk to you for a couple minutes. Let's grab that blunt. Let's go back here. I just want to talk to you real quick. Is that cool?
Now, are these the words you use? I want to talk to you, or how did
Yeah, I
you?
said, hey, I need to holler at you real quick in the back about what we talked about the other day.
Okay.
And that was marijuana.
So is Paul Hoff agreeable then to talking to you privately?
Very agreeable.
Where did you go?
We walked this way, past the front door, and into that bedroom, the big bedroom right here in the front. Sorry, that screen's kind of blocking it, but right back there.
The bedroom that's on the bottom of the exhibit?
That is correct.
And tell us what you said to Paul Hoff when you got to that bedroom.
I told him, I told him that I was sorry to be bringing this to his house, but that the defendant was wanted to, pardon my language, fuck Chris up. We were kind of talking about the robberies with Andy, and that's when Paul said he didn't have a problem with Andy. He didn't even know what was happening that night. He didn't want no problems. He just needed a hookup on weed. And then that's when I told him that I could probably help him out. I didn't want no issues, I just told him that I could probably help him out with some weed. I wasn't trying to bring no problems. I didn't have no problems with him. I wasn't trying to, but this is just kind of where I found myself. And I told him if he had a problem with it, let me know. I'll go out there, we'll leave. But if it's cool, he wants to handle it one-on-one.
Okay. And did Paul Hoff indicate that he had a problem with what you're going to do?
He had no problem with it at all.
Okay. So what did you do next?
Paul and I were in that back room. He rolled a blunt. We were smoking, and I was standing there. He kind of was asking me about prices and talking to me about marijuana. And I'm kind of conversating with him, but I'm just like listening to what's going on in the front room. And it felt like I was there forever. I think it was only a matter of a couple minutes, but he was doing a lot of talking. I was doing a lot of listening, but I really wasn't listening. I was just kind of in shock or didn't know what was going to happen next.
Well, hadn't you and Blonic talked about how things were going to go down if Hoff was okay with what you're going to do?
Yeah, he told me if Paul wasn't okay with it, to come out.
Okay.
If he was okay with it, just chill. So I was chilling.
Okay. And what happened after you?
We were there forever and we're smoking the marijuana blunt, and we smoked like the whole thing. So we were there for a few minutes, close to probably 5 minutes. Then I heard laughing. I heard Chris laughing, and I heard the defendant laughing.
And what did that mean to you?
That meant to me that something weird happened, or he changed his mind, or that it was cool to come out and that we were gonna jump him or beat him up.
Okay. And why did that laughter mean that things were going to change?
He just told me that at the house, if he starts laughing, then it's all good and we'll just beat him up or something. That was just kind of like, I guess, the code to come out the room.
So what happened after you came out of the room?
Well, I was relieved. I walked back in, there was a totally different vibe in the room. They were both laughing, talking back and forth. And then that's when Paul and I came back over and were standing by the bar, and Paul handed the rest of the blunt to Chris. And then that's when Chris said, "Secrets don't make friends. What were you guys back in there whispering about?"
Did you tell him?
Told him it didn't have anything to do with him. And then that's kind of what started the issues between him and I.
Okay. And tell us about that issue that developed.
So I'm standing here, and Chris
By the
is
bar?
at the bar. Paul's right here. Chris is right here, and he's kind of talking a little, I guess, shit, about secrets don't make friends, and what were we talking about? And because I believe he probably knew in his head that Paul was trying to get weed off of me, and I think Paul was one of his best customers. I don't really know, but I assumed that was what he thought we were talking about. That's why he had some animosity. And the defendant was standing behind Chris right here. So Chris and I start kind of bantering back and forth, and I'm looking at the defendant to kind of see what's going to happen next.
Okay. And did you get any kind of cue from Drew Blahnik?
He looked at me, nodded, and kind of smiled.
Okay. Up to that point, had there been any discussions at all about a possible robbery of others? That is, did Chris Bagley ever bring that up?
Yes. When Paul Hoff and I were talking in that back bedroom, I noticed he had like Kevlar on, like a bulletproof vest under his flannel.
Who was wearing that?
Paul Hoff.
Okay.
And I asked him what that was for, and that's when he told me that they were going to go rob a group of skateboarders that I know called the Slew Crew.
Did you hear Chris Bagley himself talk or make any discussions about a robbery of the Slew Crew?
Yes, after we were kind of bickering back and forth about what we were whispering about, and I asked him what was so funny that they were both laughing about, and then the defendant told me that Chris wanted him to go on a robbery of the Slew Crew, and he didn't know who they were.
Did you join in the conversation about that?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I told Chris, I told him that was the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I told him that you don't know anything about kind of their operation. They don't keep anything at their house. I told him that they have an AR-15 upstairs that I'm aware of the house that they were talking about going to rob, and that wouldn't be good for anybody. I asked him where he got his information from, and then I kind of started making fun of him, telling him that, so you're going to take two people with you to go do something that you don't even know where anything's at. He doesn't even keep his stuff there. That's stupid. And me calling him stupid and telling him that was dumb kind of led in the gateway into the conversations about the robberies of Andy.
Okay. When you started in on Chris Bagley about what a bad idea it was to try to rip off the Slew Crew, how did he take that? Did he become angry?
Yeah, very angry. That's when he pulled out of that black knapsack a big set of keys. And he said, if I'm so stupid, how come I have these keys? And they were a big set of keys that he gotten from Andy in the October robbery of all his properties. I think he thought safes of every, one of Andy's addresses or things that he had, keys to. And that's when I responded, well, you dumbass, that was 2 months ago. You don't think he's changed all those locks?
So this argument you were having with Chris Bagley at that time, did it escalate or did it turn physical?
Yeah, it escalated. He told me I was a pussy and I'm not as tough as I think I am. I started laughing. He kind of got a little bit more aggressive. And I took it as, a confrontation. So I stood up, walked towards him, and that's when he pushed me.
And could you use the pointer again and show on exhibit number 8 where the two of you in this pushing match started?
Paul's here. I'm here. Chris is here. And the defendant is right here.
So Paul Hoff and Drew Blonic were kind of on opposite sides of the room, is that right?
That is correct.
And you and Chris Bagley were more in the center of the room.
That is correct.
And that's when things turned physical.
That is correct.
And tell us how that physical confrontation developed.
He pushed me. I took a step back. I told him not to put his hands on me. I said, don't ever touch me again. I'll knock you the fuck out. He starts kind of getting aggressive, goes to touch me again. At that point, I see the look on the defendant's face, just kind of like a smile or a grin as he was standing behind Chris. And this is when I expected him to punch him or hit him or do something. Chris pushes me again. And at that point, it all hits me, the situation that I found myself in. Somehow, I'm in Paul Hoff's trailer, getting in a physical argument, somebody that I really didn't have problems with, and it was going to turn bad, and I knew it was going to turn bad.
So when you are kind of in a standoff with Chris Bagley, essentially Drew Blahnik was behind Chris Bagley.
That is correct.
So you could see Drew Blahnik, but Chris Bagley couldn't.
That is correct.
Okay. And I think you were describing this shoving match that began. Tell us again how it continued from there.
So then he pushed me, I backpedal, and that's when I told him, touch me again, I'm going to knock you out. He goes to push me again. I grab him by his shirt, and I throw him up against the wall area right here.
The wall on what would be the west side of the trailer?
That is correct.
Okay.
Towards the front door.
Now, the refrigerator and the stove that are depicted in this diagram, were they there back then?
I don't believe so. No, it was open.
Okay. And you pushed Chris Bagley up against the wall.
That is true.
What happened next?
As I kind of threw him against the wall, so I'm still standing here, he's there. I can see Paul Hoff there. I can't see the defendant because I believe he's behind me. And I kind of remember looking at the front door and looking at him. And that's when I made a split decision to bum rush him. So I charged at him.
At Chris Bagley.
At Chris Bagley. I pinned him up against the wall and got him in like a bear hug. In grappling or anything, they're called underhooks, where I took my arms, put them underneath his arms, and I clasped my hands behind his head.
So you're face to face,
Face to face.
and you had both your arms locked around him?
Underneath. And
Underneath?
then underneath, so he couldn't move. And I had him locked in there. And that's when I was telling him he needs to chill out, chill out. I told him not to touch me.
How do you react to that?
Fuck you.
Okay.
So then, from that point, I hear gun, gun.
Could you tell who was saying that?
The defendant.
And I know you talked earlier about seeing a gun on a stool, but
Correct.
did you see Chris Bagley in possession of a gun when you had this physical altercation with him?
No, I did not see the gun on him. He did not pull the gun on me. I did not see the gun until after I turned him this way, away, and kind of looked back because my glasses got knocked off my face, and I kind of saw the gun right here up against the wall.
And where was the gun then when you first saw it during this confrontation?
I didn't see it until after I turned him away this way. I still had him in the clinch, and the gun was here, and by this point, we are all the way over here.
So where was the gun when you first saw it? Did Chris Bagley have it? Was it on the floor? or
It was
what?
on the floor.
Okay. So at some point during this shoving match you're having with Chris Bagley, a gun spills out the floor.
Apparently, I didn't see it until I turned him away.
Was there ever a time during your confrontation with Chris Bagley when you saw him ever reach for a gun
No,
or produce a gun?
no,
And the first time you became aware of a gun was when you heard someone yell out, "Gun, gun," and you saw it on the floor.
correct, other than seeing it unloaded when I first came into the residence.
And who was yelling, "Gun, gun"?
The defendant.
And what happened next?
When I turned him away, we were right here, and I moved him in towards a headlock. Tell him, relax, relax, chill out. I can see Paul standing right here, looking at me. And then at that point, I felt somebody behind me.
And who was that somebody?
The defendant.
What did you see him do?
Couldn't see it. I could feel it. I had him in a headlock, and it felt like somebody bit me in my hand. I'm like, ah. And at that same time, he's like, let me go. I'm like, chill out. He's like, let me go. But I kind of felt kind of his strength kind of go away a little bit. And it all happened simultaneously. And like I said, I thought I got bit or something in my hand. I didn't quite know what was happening. And I let him go. I spun to my left, started walking away down towards here, not really realizing what was happening, kind of looking for my glasses. I turned back around, and I see the defendant have Chris by his hair in like a punching motion, but like, you know, I learned later a stabbing motion.
Did you see him stabbing Chris Bagley?
I saw his arm go back
Okay.
a bunch of times.
And where were these movements with the arm by Drew Blahnik? Where were they?
Towards his head.
Okay. And how was he holding his head?
His hair, like this, like that.
And where was he stabbing him?
I believe in the neck, maybe in the head, neck. I don't know where his wounds were, but I just upper. I don't know if he got stabbed in the chest or anything like that. But
Could you hear anyone talk? Was there any kind of dialogue when this is going on? What did you hear?
just some kind of muffled sound from Chris and the defendant, like kind of like groaning or not yelling, just like making some like noise or something.
How about Drew Blahnik? Did you hear him say?
That's
what'd you
him
hear from
making
him?
that noise, the animal, like aggressive.
Do you know how many times Drew Blahnik stabbed Chris Bagley?
I have no idea.
When Drew Blahnik intervened in your shoving match with Chris Bagley, did you think that Chris Bagley was a threat to you?
Never. We were in a shoving match. There was a gun on the ground, but I never felt like that gun was any threat to me. If the defendant wouldn't have got involved, it would have ended right there because I didn't want to hurt Chris. I just wanted a way out of the house.
And based on what you described as this shoving match that you had with Chris Bagley, did you get the impression that he was a danger to anybody in that trailer?
No. I think he was only acting like that because Paul was there. Feel like he looked up to Paul a little bit. I feel like he was just doing that because of Paul a little bit.
Okay. His
He was-
shoving match with you?
Yeah, he was way more aggressive than I've ever seen Chris be. We were never aggressive towards each other.
After Drew Blahnik interjected into your shoving match, I mean, did you ever see Chris in a position to either defend himself or fight back at all?
No, I had my back turned for most of it, I believe. I turned at the very end. And then that's when I saw Chris fall to the ground.
I think you told us earlier that when Drew Blahnik first intervened, you had Chris Bagley in a headlock, is that right?
That is correct.
And then you described this stinging sensation in your hand,
Yes, and my thumb.
and what did that turn out to be?
Stab wound.
Tell us a little bit about this stab wound.
It's pretty deep. It was right in my thumb,
And which hand was it?
my left hand.
Was that because you had Chris Bagley in a headlock with your hand?
That is correct.
Okay. So your hand would have been around his neck then?
His neck, his head. I think it was more of his head. Because he's popping his head out.
So when Drew Blahnik first began, I want to make sure I understand this correctly, as when Drew Blahnik first intervened and began to stab Chris Bagley, you had Chris immobilized in this headlock.
Correct.
And how would you describe, I guess, just if we go by size, how would you describe Drew Blahnik's size and physique compared to Chris Bagley's?
I believe they're probably around the same height, but the defendant's a lot stronger, more knowledgeable of probably wrestling and how to fight, I guess.
Did Paul Hoff ever get involved in any of this?
No.
What did he do during this episode?
I didn't really see his face. At the end, as I bend down to Chris, asking him if he's got a towel, asking Paul if he's got a towel, he's kind of smiling and laughing. I didn't realize how bad the injuries were at that time.
And I want to ask you, just based on what you yourself saw in terms of Drew Blahnik stabbing Chris Bagley, was Chris always upright when Drew Blahnik was stabbing him, or how did that go?
Like I said, I only saw, I think, the back end of it, but he was holding him up.
By his hair.
Yeah.
Okay. Did there come a time when Chris Bagley then went to the floor?
Yes, that's right. After I turned around and I saw a couple motions, the defendant let him go.
After he went to the floor?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see what Drew Blahnik did with the knife that he used to stab Chris Bagley?
As I was bent down to Chris and I was saying we need to call 911, I saw him hand the knife to Paul real quick, and then I think it got set back on the counter.
So do you know what knife Drew Blahnik used then to stab Chris Bagley?
I believe it was the knife that I saw on the bar top.
So tell us about this. You described this L-shaped bar. It appears to be an L-shaped bar with a glass top. Were there some articles on top of the bar?
Yes, on top of the bar, I saw at one point, well, there's some marijuana and some marijuana cigarettes, or some Swisher Sweet cigarillos. And then that right here towards the corners when I saw a long knife. I would say looked like a decorative knife. Maybe somebody that collects knives would hang on their wall. looked like a native, I don't know, Native American colors or pattern on the handle.
Was this a fixed blade knife?
Yeah, you didn't like shoot out or eject or anything. It was a long knife with a handle.
And how would you describe its shape?
Just a long blade. I only saw like it real quick. Just like a, I'm sorry. It was really long.
So when did you first come to learn that Drew Blahnik had used a knife that was on Hoff's bar instead of the knife that he had strapped to his waist?
Afterwards, after I bent down to try to help Chris, and Paul's like, he's toast. Get up, like, he's done. He's done. And then that's when I saw the knife briefly on the bar counter.
So Drew Blahnik put the knife back on the bar after the
I
stabbing?
believe he handed it to Paul, and I saw that, and then Paul put it on the counter.
Okay.
And then it was put in a plastic bag.
So Paul Hoff never tried to interfere with what Drew Blahnik did to Chris Bagley.
No.
Tell us then about the aftermath. I mean, I think you talked about getting a towel and calling 911. Did you actually expect that someone was going to call 911?
I didn't know. I didn't know how bad it was. And I guess I don't know if I wasn't thinking. I just saw that he was hurt. I guess I don't know if that was just my natural reaction,
Okay.
but he needed help.
So it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction by you that we should call 911.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want him to get hurt. I know it sounds crazy, but I didn't want him to be hurt. Nobody should be hurt like that.
How did the others react to your suggestion?
They didn't care.
Was
Cold.
there any discussion at all that the police should be called in?
Not by one of them. When I said that he's done, that's what they said, he's done.
Did Drew Blahnik ever say, we need to call the police? This is a case of self-defense?
Never.
Did he ever suggest to you at any point after Chris Bagley was stabbed that the police should be called?
No.
What was the discussion about?
I believe Paul Hoff said something about buying breakfast or Perkins. They were talking between themselves. I don't really know what was said. Besides that, I was just in like a haze. I guess I started like screaming or yelling or raising my voice. And I couldn't breathe.
So did someone take charge then? Did someone take charge of the discussions about what they were going to do, or what you're going to do with the body?
Them two, I believe Paul might have. All I kind of remember is the defendant coming up to me and I'm like sitting on the ground. He's like, I need to chill out. He said, I need to chill out. I remember I couldn't breathe. I think I might have been yelling. He's like, if you want to get out of here, you gotta chill out. You gotta chill out, relax.
So what did you do then about Chris Bagley's body then?
I sat there. I think my can of chew must have been on the counter. Defendant handed me my chew and then asked me if I wanted a cigarette. That's like the last thing I kind of remember. They let me step outside for a half a second. I think I might have been getting loud again. Paul Hoff looked at me pretty aggressively and told me to get the fuck back in the house. It was at this back door here. And there were some lights on the neighbor's trailer, and you could hear people in there. And so I came back in and I slumped. I was sitting right here
By the back door?
by the back door. And at that point, I believe I heard something about plastic. And Paul Hoff came out with plastic, and him and the defendant had wrapped up Chris in plastic.
Anything else besides plastic?
No.
So was this like a tarp?
It was just like clear plastic. I don't know if it's like painting. It was some sort of remodeling or construction that I think he had planned to do on the trailer, but he had plastic in the back.
Had they already wrapped the body by the time you got there? Or did you actually see them do it?
I'm sitting here slumped. I'm like looking at the ground, and I believe they were doing it as I'm just looking down, and I was kind of in a daze. So they were doing it, but I wasn't staring at them. I was just looking on the ground, trying to breathe.
So what happened then after Chris Bagley's body was rolled up in the plastic?
They carried him to the back, this way, towards the back window here.
The window at the top of the exhibit?
Yes. I'm still sitting here, and the defendant comes up to me. I don't know where Paul is. I think he's in the back room at this time. He just tells me, sorry. Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm sorry. I need you to help me. I need you to help me.
And did you
he's
help
like,
him?
Yes.
And how did you help him?
He said he needed me to drive.
Okay.
He said, let's get to your house, and I'll take care of the rest of it. I just need you for 5 minutes.
What did Drew Blahnik ask you to do?
Well, Paul Hoff is the one who told me. Paul Hoff comes up at this point, and I think my keys must have been on the bar with my chew, because the defendant handed me my keys, and he told me that I needed to take my truck, and I guess there's a path that you can pull in behind and park right up against this window.
Is this a decent stopping point?
Yes. Yes.